welcome to another Saturday Stories. Today it is May 16th. We have with us a very special person for Saturday Stories. We have Tim Coleman. And so Tim, I like to start these off with just a classic question. How did you come to know Jesus?
Oh man, I love hearing people's answers to these questions. By the way, every Saturday, especially this one, right? I love hearing how people come to know Jesus and just the way that God intersects with our lives. And man, my story is crazy. So my parents were divorced when I was one. I grew up with my mom. My mom raised my older brother and I, two boys in the Chicago area. Nobody in our family was a Christian. Nobody knew Jesus. And one Saturday morning, I think I was maybe like 2 or 3 in our apartment. There was a knock on the door, and there were 2 people sent in there from this local church, and they ran a bus ministry. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's kind of an old school method of churches that they would use, but they had about 30 or 40 school buses. Every Sunday morning, they would send those things out into the Chicagoland area, pick up kids, bring them to church, load them up after church, and take them home. And so my mom was a bartender at the time, didn't have a car, and they were like, "Hey, do you want your boys to ride the bus to church?" And she was like, "Sure." And it was probably more so just like, Saturday night as a bartender, right? Like they could just sort of get out of the house. It's a church. So, what could go wrong there? But she sent us on the bus, and then she ended up going as well. And she very quickly came to Christ in this church. For all that I can remember, I grew up in this family where we went to church like every Sunday, every Wednesday. It was that kind of deal. And so I was around it from like my first memory. And first generation Christian, my mom. And when I was 5 years old, I sat in a message, our pastor in a church, and he taught about hell. And it was like a hellfire brimstone kind of message. We don't hear those these days, thankfully. But that's what it was, man. And just as a 5-year-old, I was like, man, I need Jesus. And I didn't really have like a great concept of my sin, but I knew that I needed Jesus, and I turned my life toward Christ that day. It was a Sunday. And then, but it really wasn't until really, I was like a junior in high school. That's so I sort of kind of walked the walk and talked the talk. But when I was a junior in high school, long story, another time, but my faith really became my own. And that was really from like 5 years old to like a junior in high school. That's when it sort of came together for me. And that was it. So it was a crazy story, man, of how Jesus intersected our lives. Just a knock on our apartment door out of the blue, and redirected the course of our entire family.
I love the story of how you came to Santa Cruz. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind touching on that.
We've been in full-time ministry for about 25 years now almost, and the first half of that was on staff with ministries like Campus Crusade for Christ and those types of ministries. And then the second half of it really has been in pastoral ministry in the local church. And so about 10, 11 years ago, Nicole and I we planted a brand new church in Atlanta, Georgia, where we were living, just like Danny and Jenny did right here in Santa Cruz. And I was thinking about this the other day. Hope we just celebrated our 9-year anniversary, right, as a church, and we planted our church almost right around the same time. So like while they were doing their thing in Santa Cruz, we were doing our thing in Atlanta, and so that's kind of cool. But I pastored that church for about 7, 8 years. And then God just very clearly opened the door for us to transition. I don't know. I know, Steve, I know you at one time were on that side of the country, and Atlanta, we sort of had that connection, man. The first time we walked in Hope, I saw your Braves hat, and I was like, all right, man. We got some Atlanta peeps here. But we all have these times, these seasons in life where we just know that something is happening, like God is moving, and it will likely end up with us in some kind of transition. And that's really what happened for Nicole and I. We were just kind of plugging along. We were kind of doing the thing in Atlanta, and all of a sudden God just sort of began to stir our hearts and say, I've got something else for you. And so right about that time, I had two things in front of me. One of them was the 5th largest church in America, right? It was in the South, and I'm sure, would have been just fine going there. But the other was this little church on the east side of Santa Cruz County. We had never heard of Santa Cruz. We had no idea. Like, we had never been out to Santa Cruz. We had barely been to California a couple of times. And right at that time, I read some Barna research that talked about how the greater Bay Area, including Santa Cruz County, was the 5th most post-Christian region in our country. Post-Christian meaning people don't even identify not just as a Christian, but with Christianity, with God in general. Like just that type of community. And for us, it was a no-brainer. We said, we've got to go there. We need to go to that place, to that area of the country where we can really just come as an ambassador of the love of Jesus, right? And where it's just so needed. And then we came for a visit, and we were like, oh man, this is unreal. Like, we couldn't believe it, man. We just the beauty and the hiking and the surfing and just like all this stuff that our family loves to do. And we were just like, this is amazing. So God, about 4 years ago, God just very clearly relocated our family all East Coast, and just sort of picked us up and dropped us right down in Santa Cruz County, really to just sort of be ambassadors for the love of Jesus. And it's been a wild ride over the last 4 years, but we're part of the Hope family now, and we love what God's doing, not just in us, but here in this community as well. So, yeah, pretty crazy story. Yeah,
I love it though. I love hearing that story. What might be one of the biggest impacts Christ has had on your life? Obviously, Christ impacts our life throughout our duration on earth, but what's one of the biggest so far?
Yeah. Man, that's a great question. I think all these questions, by the way, for everybody watching, these things every Saturday, man, these are great questions for everybody to just ask themselves, right? Like having to think through and like ask yourself these questions, come up with these answers. Man, it just really tells us a lot about our faith and what Jesus has done. I think for me, the greatest impact that Jesus has had for me, I told you I grew up in a single parent home. My mom, raised my brother and I, and when we talk about Jesus, we talk about God, Holy Spirit, kind of, those three, this aspect of God the Father is really a significant thing in my life. I didn't grow up with that in my home, and I saw God provide all along the way to meet that particular need in my heart and in my life, and sort of fill that void. And so as I've gotten older and I've really sort of embraced the person of Jesus, man, it's what has impacted me the most is just the fact that as I now have kids, I have 3 kids, they're all teenagers, and God's sending his son, just the depth of what I would call the relentless love of God through the person of Jesus. I think that's what's impacted me the most. Like the lengths that God went to intersect my life with Jesus and his work and who he is and his love. It's just relentless. Like God just stayed after it. And I told you I kind of grew up in a family that went to church, but like everybody, man, I had my own pathway and went off that path, and man, Jesus has just pursued me the whole way. So, man, I think what's impacted me the most, long answer to your question, is just the relentless love of Jesus that I've experienced in my life is just been overwhelming, man. I'm just super grateful for sure.
Love to hear that. How has Christ affected your community, like the people that surround you?
Yeah, for being my generation, my mom, and then my brother and I, first generation Christians, you know, Jesus has just literally redirected the entire direction of my family. My brother and I are both in full-time ministry, have been our entire careers. Both have amazing wives that know Jesus. All, my 3 teenagers, his 2 teenagers know Christ. Lots of people now in our family know Christ, and God is just like literally redirected our entire family / community, as you put it. My immediate community in my household, man, I can't imagine where we would be and what we would be doing and how we would be struggling, especially in times like this. It's just given us a stability and a hope, really, that we've been included in the mission of God. And I think, man, that's a whole nother conversation, but the fact that we've been invited into the mission of God on this earth, this is what defines our family, man. We are like when Jesus stood up in the temple and was like, "I've been called to preach good news to the poor and recovery of sight for the blind, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor on this earth." Man, that's really what we're all about. And so we wouldn't have any of that. That's how God's impacted, our family and our community.
How has the pandemic affected you?
Yeah, man, it's a great question. Like everybody, we've been impacted in good ways, in really challenging ways. We're fortunate in that I was already working from home, and Nicole is an essential worker. So like our jobs, we didn't lose our jobs, which we're just super grateful for. I think for us, then the impact has been more internal to our family. Just spending this time together. I've got my oldest is a freshman at Cabrillo. Then we have our middle will be a senior at Aptos High School next year, and our youngest will be a freshman at Aptos High School. And man, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking. There's just not a lot of time left, and so it's unbelievable, really. I mean, obviously we wouldn't want it in the context of this situation, but for what it is, it's given us time together. In fact, you can maybe see kind of like right behind me, right over here.
Yeah.
Is this chicken coop that I built during the shelter at home, and Pastor Danny is building tree houses, so I gotta step in there, and try to do something, So we built this chicken coop, and man, just the time together has been super powerful. But I think the main thing for us has just been a renewal of how much we truly depend on God to meet our needs. Right? So like whether I'm heading out of the house, trying to go find some toilet paper for a house of 5, 3 teenagers, as part of that, or whether, I'm wondering about my job, or I'm dealing with the anxiety of people around me. Man, I don't know that I've really leaned into God like I have. It's been a long time since I've leaned into God like I have in these last couple, few months. In that way, I love what's happened. I'm looking forward to the recovery, but God has definitely deepened our connection with Him during these days for sure.
So lastly, and this is the question that I've been super stoked on, what are you doing behind the scenes at Hope Church?
Oh man, this year I go into every year and I ask God, like in December, I ask God to give me a word for the next year, right? I'm like one of those guys, and not like a word like give me some truth, but like a single word, a literal word that I ask God to give me as sort of a theme for the next year. And this last December, man, the word that was just super clear that God was giving me was this word follow. That's a tough word for me, man. I think one of the spiritual gifts God's giving to me is leadership, and I that's an interesting word for me. And so but I thought, all right, let's go. Let's see what this is. And really, I think what it came down to is God just saying, listen, I just want you to follow where I lead you this year. Don't question it. You ever see that movie with Jim Carrey? What's that?
Yes, man.
Yeah. Yes, man. Yes, man. So it's kind of like that. I kind of felt like that. I was like, okay, God, I'm just going to say yes to whatever you tell me to do, not what everybody says. But just kind of lead me in that, and I want to go hard at whatever you put in front of me to do, and so at Hope Church, we've been able to jump in and lead a couple hangouts, this year, and we just kicked off a brand new one last night. And we've got space in there. It's a weekly hangout. Anybody's looking Thursday nights, man, get on the hangout page on our website, and you'll see us on there. You can click to join. But our kids are involved in youth ministry. And then one of the things that Pastor Danny and I have really been sort of unpacking is this whole thing around church online. It used to be that before all this happened, that church online was sort of an extra. It was like, hey, if you were sort of modern or cutting edge, or you want to do something a little different, you'd have like an online thing happening. And of course, now it's all we have. And so as we look to the future, as everything sort of begins to open back up again, the reality is a lot of people are going to take a lot of time to work their way back into physical gatherings again. And then there's a whole slew of people who that's just not their deal. Like they're just not going to get in their car on a Sunday morning and go to church. And so we started talking about like what would it look like if we just had this online community that goes well beyond the pandemic, and so we started dreaming about some stuff and planning some stuff. You're going to hear some cool things come out in the next, literally the next 2 or 3 weeks. We're going to throw some stuff out there. But so all that to say, I provide leadership now to our church online community, which is going to just continue to sort of grow even past the pandemic, and help people find a way to connect to the church and ultimately the love of Jesus in maybe a little bit more of a non-conventional way. And so church online community, hangouts, and our kids are in the youth group. That's sort of where we hang our hats at Hope.
Thank you so much, Tim, for joining in. Hope family, that was Tim Coleman. And tune in tomorrow at 9 a.m. for SoCal, 10 a.m. for Scotts Valley, and then send any prayer requests you have to prayer@discoverhope.church. We love you guys. We'll see you in the next one. Peace. Yeah.